Hi, everyone. It's Charlene Lee here. And today I'm going to be talking about how do you change your culture? And this is one of my favorite topics because it seems so difficult to be able to change your culture. I mean, how do you change culture? I come across so many organizations and leaders who say, my culture is the way it is. And there's nothing I can do to change it. I've tried all these things, I've tried initiatives, campaigns, and it seems like a battleship that's impossible to turn. It's just going and steaming along, and there's nothing I can do to really alter its course. So today I want to talk about how you can systematically, strategically, and intentionally change your culture. So to get started, if you're joining here today live, would love for you to share where you're coming from, but also share something about your culture that you would like to change. What is it about your culture that just bugs you to no end? That you wish that if you had a fairy godmother's magic wand, you could wave it and poof, your culture would change. It's not that easy. I wish I could give you an easy button that you could press and say, poof, it's done. But that doesn't happen. So today I'm going to talk about how do you actually change culture. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a story about a battleship, actually an aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz, that I was on as an illustration of how this could work. I had the privilege and honor of spending 24 hours on an aircraft carrier, along with 15 other bloggers. And one of the things that we had a chance to do was to go up onto the bridge and hang out with the captain on the bridge. And you have to understand that this was an extraordinary day because it was towards the end of a 6-month training program, and they were doing a huge surge operation. So 100 aircraft, these fighter jets, were taking off on the bow of the ship and then landing in the back of it every single hour. At the same time, they were going at full steam ahead, and there were 3 supply ships tethered to the aircraft carrier with these thin little lines moving things, supplies back and forth. And this activity of supplying underway is one of the most dangerous activities because if one of the lines breaks, then the whole thing is a catastrophe. So in the middle of this, the captain gives an order to turn the battleship, to turn the aircraft carrier. And slowly but surely, the aircraft carrier is turning. All the aircraft taking off and landing are turning with it, and the supply ships, and presumably all the submarines and other ships around it, were also turning. And I asked the captain, this is fantastic. It's a beautiful example of how ready and prepared your team is, your Armada basically is to take on whatever obstacle or opportunity it may come across. What was it like in the beginning? And he sort of laughed and he said, well, in the beginning, at the very beginning of this training activity, when he gave the order to turn, nothing happened. The ship just stood there. It just didn't, people didn't know how to do this. But through concerted training, very clear explanations of what the expected behavior is, and an underlying belief in this wholehearted commitment to the mission of the Navy, they were able to create that training and create that environment where 6 months later, they were a smooth operating machine. So here's the question. When it comes to your culture, to your organization, when there's an opportunity that comes your way or a disruptive force that stands in the way as an obstacle, how ready is your organization to give the order to be able to turn as needed? That when you give the order to turn, how confident are you that the organization will actually make that turn? This is what culture is all about. So culture is all about the beliefs and the behaviors that underlie the way that you work. And if brand is the way that the world describes you, then culture is the way that the people inside the organization describes its beliefs and behaviors. So if culture is made up of beliefs and behaviors, then to change culture, you need to change your beliefs, you need to change your behaviors. The two go hand in hand. And in many ways, the reasons why cultures arise that we don't like, we want to change at these undesirable beliefs and behaviors, the reason they exist is because we haven't been diligent in making sure we have the right beliefs and getting rid of the limiting ones, that we are practicing the right behaviors, and not addressing and stopping the ones that we don't want to see. So what I would like to encourage you to do is to do this one simple exercise with your team. If you want to work on your culture, then sit together as a team and identify the limiting beliefs of your culture. What are the things that you say to yourselves? What are the things that we believe in that we think are holding us back from this exponential growth and disruptive future that lies before us? So if you can identify what those beliefs are, write them down on a piece of paper, Post-it notes, stick them in the center, and again, go and look at the ones that you have in common. Because if you all believe that these beliefs are no longer worth hanging on to, then make the commitment not to believe them anymore. And then identify the behaviors that are associated with those beliefs. And then agree that whenever you see those behaviors, you're going to point it out to each other and go, no, we don't do those things anymore because we don't believe in those things anymore. Some of the most common beliefs I hear organizations saying to themselves are, I need permission before I can act. That failure is not an option. That I'm just a fill in the blank. It could be individual contributor, a manager, VP, even the CEO. I can't make change happen. If instead you were to replace those with different beliefs that say, for example, instead of I don't have permission, is I understand our strategy and my responsibilities, and I have agency. I have a sense of ownership that I can go in, step in, make changes happen, and then be held accountable for those changes. I'm happy to take that on. It's instead of thinking that failure is not an option, that we now believe that failure, not meeting our goal, is defined as here's a data point. And instead of thinking about it as a negative thing and something to be shameful about, you're going to go forward and actually do something to close that gap between what the actual results were and what your ideal results would be. That is just another data point and a gap then to be able to close. And the idea and the belief that I'm just a fill in the blank, I can't actually do anything, again, goes back to the fact, well, what is the thing that I can do in my area? Let's clearly define what the edges are and the permissions of what you can do versus assuming that nothing can be done. And then when that is clear, then we can go out to the edges and be really clear about living at those edges of disruption and change. So that's an exercise you can do, because if you can identify the things that you don't want to have anymore, then you can start replacing them with new beliefs that it can actually have. So I see a couple people coming in here. Ashish, hello, great to see you. Dr. M, good to see you here again. And Hamid, hello, welcome. Would love for you to share any thoughts you have about what pieces of your culture, what parts of your culture that you would love to see changed. And so Dr. M has his one that management starts one level above me. And so that's always like, okay, somebody else's responsibility and avoiding accountability. I feel oftentimes that these ideas of, well, I can't do something is an avoidance of ownership, an avoidance of accountability. Well, what happens if I fail? What happens if it doesn't work out? That could be a career limiting activity. So what are the things that you can do in your organization to provide that structure, provide the trust so that people feel safe and comfortable to be able to take these moves? What are the beliefs that people have that if they make one mistake, they're out of the organization? And how can you start changing that? So I want to take some time and go through a couple best practices. One of them is thinking about these limiting beliefs and identifying anything in your organization that could be supporting these old limiting beliefs. I talked about this in my last week's stream about how if you want to change a culture, then you really need to identify the strategic elements that are important for you to execute on and how your culture is going to support it or not. And if there's anything supporting the old culture, the old way of doing things, the incentives that you may have, the rewards, the reporting structures that reinforce different ways of behaviors, then you need to make those changes. Rip those things out because they're just holding us in this comfort zone and not allowing us to push out into those edges and be able to explore these new behaviors. So if there's anything supporting limiting beliefs and old behaviors, then you need to strip those out and replace them with new beliefs and new incentives to act in a different way. And Dr. M, another great point. Yes, what I'm talking about here is providing scaffolding. Well, you know that this is one of my favorite words, that scaffolding is there to support this new power, this new system of empowerment. So to talk about that scaffolding, one of the stories, the three things that you can do to really reinforce these new beliefs, the scaffolding, is that you can provide organizational structure. I once worked with an organization that came to me and said, we have this new strategy around digital transformation. We have a whole new way of going out and executing and being in the world. Now we need to know, how do we organize for this? And I thought that was a really good point, but they were almost putting the cart before the horse. Because, well, it's hard to know how you want to organize it if you haven't looked at your processes, you looked at your beliefs, the behaviors, the activities that you're taking that are going to be supportive of this new strategy. So we really started mapping out the processes. We started mapping out all these other things and did all those other activities that are easier to change, the soft part of your structure, because you can dictate those. The hard infrastructure of your organizational structure really comes when you've wrung out every single last bit of efficiencies and improvements from the soft side. So you can keep in mind how you want to change org structures, but I think sometimes we rely on org structures to do the heavy lifting without looking at the softer side of things first, or at least in concert. So these softer things are, for example, processes. Do a systematic review of all the processes you have, because these are your behaviors written down in code. And take a look and see which of these are no longer working for you. Which ones are outdated? I mean, when was the last time you did a deep process review to understand what's working, what was working, what needed to be improved, and what things just needed to be jettisoned? I worked with this one company, Telstra, and the largest telecom company in Australia. And one day the CEO posted on their internal network, what are the processes that are outdated or no longer needed? Which are the ones that we should get rid of? We need to be more efficient in order to really improve our operations and to be able to serve customers better. And they expected some response, but the response they got was overwhelming. They got over 800 responses within the first hour of that post. Taken aback, they're like, okay, we've got a lot of pent-up demand for this. So they categorized them, went through them, and then went back into that post and explained right there and then to the people who suggested them, yeah, that's a good point. We don't know why we're doing this. We should get rid of it. But to others, they would say, no, we need this process, and this is why. That was, again, solidifying what the beliefs and behaviors were in the organization from a process perspective. And let me just take this one comment from Sumit. Let me just read through this. It's fairly long. I'm going to just pose it on here, so it's a little bit hard to read. I've experienced two extremes of organizations who are ready and not so ready to be able to embrace change and to change the day-to-day mundane task and automation. Three things make a difference: a detailed understanding of the strategy. Absolutely agree with that. Open and honest conversations about the changes that need to be made. So important to bring in the new ideas that you have. And the third one, unfortunately, I can't read on the screen here, but hopefully we can be able to see it here. Let me just try to get into it. Yeah, my screen isn't big enough to see it. I'm going to have to just come back to you. And this is great comments, but my screen is not allowing me to see it right now. So my apologies, Sumit. I'm traveling and my laptop, it just isn't cooperating today with that longer comment. So the other key area, though, that I want to talk about, a key way to provide that scaffolding, again, is with LORE, L-O-R-E. And let me just share with you some slides that I have. I'll make this a little bigger so you can see it. When I talk about lore, this is the really soft side. These are the things that are not necessarily written down in organizational structures or in process maps. These are things like your rituals, your symbols, and also the stories that you tell. This is one of my favorite rituals that reinforce a culture. And this is coming from LinkedIn. They have this beautiful thing where they have your parents come to work day. And it's hard because parents have no idea what their children oftentimes are doing at work. And it's kind of a joke. But at LinkedIn, they bring them in, really show them what LinkedIn's mission is, and then break out into the departments so they see what their child actually does on a day-to-day basis. And employees all talk about how this is one of their favorite days of the year because they feel so connected to both their company and to their family. And the reason why this is so important is that inevitably, someday there's going to be a day that comes when you just had a terrible day at work. And when that happens, who do you typically call? You call your mom, you call your dad, and you talk about it with them. And when you have that conversation, they can then we call back and harken back to that day when they came to work and talk through the challenges, talk through and support their child, their loved one through this hard time because they have been there, they've seen it and have a better understanding. These rituals are things that we look forward to. The rituals of welcoming, but also saying goodbye, of recognition. And at every single point, it's an opportunity to reinforce the underlying beliefs and the behaviors of the organization. I love this as a symbol. This is at OXO's company, and they have this beautiful wall filled with gloves. Now, OXO makes handheld tools and appliances for the home, kitchen and the home, things like can openers and spatulas. And this is a reminder for employees walking to the office every day that they are serving customers whose hands go into these gloves. They're big hands and small hands, old hands and young hands, hands riddled with arthritis. So it's a visual reminder and a symbol of who their customers are and to remind them to always focus on those customers. And then in terms of stories, I love the story of the Postit Note invention. So two engineers at 3M were met randomly. One had a need. He was a choir master and kept marking the places of the songs in the hymnal that he wanted to rehearse, and that pieces of paper kept falling off. And the other engineer had a failure. He made a glue that wasn't very sticky. And they go, oh, wait, maybe we can use that glue on the pieces of paper to make them stick inside your hymnal. So they whipped up a batch and they went to a local printer to get the paper and do this. And they just happened to have yellow paper, which is why Post-it notes are yellow. And they took it to their executives and said, hey, look at this. Isn't this great? And the executive said, no, we think it's a stupid idea. Go back to the labs. Well, this pair thought it was such a great idea that they had a brainstorming idea that they would take these Post-it notes and put it on the desks of all the executive administrative assistants of these executives. And sure enough, they loved them. And when they ran out, they ran to those executives and go, where did you get these things? We want more of them. So that's a story that can inspire you. You probably have stories inside of your organization from your founding, from the history, maybe just within the past 18 months when we've overcome so many hurdles with the pandemic and COVID-19. What are the stories we're going to use to inspire ourselves to have these beliefs and to act and behave in a very different way? So these are just some examples that I wanted to share because I do feel like these softer ideas around lore of rituals, symbols, and stories can be incredibly powerful. And then the last thing I would encourage you to do as a best practice is to measure your culture. Now, there are many tools out there like the Culture Index. There are so many tools. Pick one. It doesn't matter. Pick one that you feel really aligns with what you want to do and accomplish. What are the things you want to see in your culture? And then use it and use it consistently. If there's nothing else, then measure the behaviors because they're observable. The behaviors you don't want to see anymore, is it going down? And the behaviors you do want to see, are they going up? And when you can see these things and measure and identify what you want to, the change you want to create. That then gives you something very concrete to work towards. Instead of this amorphous thing, well, I don't know, I need to change my culture, but not sure how. You have something very concrete to look at and to measure to give you an indication of how you're doing. All right, so one of the things, I have a great comment here for Amran. The challenges awaiting us is to concretely fix and integrate key elements together. So thank you so much for sharing this, Emma, because I think this is a great insight. Once the strategies are set, the structures and processes and systems need to be aligned, and at the same time, the corporate culture. This is what I was talking about last week, and thank you for bringing this up again, Amran, which is when you're trying to fix your culture, it needs to be done side by side with your strategy. And I can't reinforce enough that as you're moving into the end of the year, oftentimes organizations are now beginning to go through the strategic planning process. Well, this should be a culture planning process too, alongside and in conjunction with and in harmony and synchronicity with your strategy. Because as you're developing your strategy here, what are the elements of your culture that need to change? Similarly, what are some of the issues around your culture that are really holding you back? And how can you use strategic initiatives to help change that culture? The two live together in the same space. So those are my comments for today. I would love for you to continue sharing the comments. I definitely go back and read them after the stream is done. And if you're listening to this recorded stream, please share what are the pieces of your culture that you would love to see or that you're actually actively working on today. Your sharing is so much appreciated because it really helps us all learn together. And let's see, I just want to share just one other quick thing about what I have going on next week for the next week's stream. We're doing a bunch of different activities this month around culture. And next week, I'm going to be talking about rethinking the employee relationship. I have some radical ideas. Would love to share them with you, get your feedback and thoughts, what works about that, what doesn't work about that, and hopefully get some conversation going around ways that we can improve and think about the way that we think about the employee relationship. Thank you so much for a great conversation here. And we will be talking again next week. Have a great day and have a great week until we meet again. Thank you.